Hi there, and welcome to our Hāpara weekly webinar series. I'm Robert Bailey. I'm a vice president at Hāpara, and I'm excited to return to host our discussion today. It's been a few months since I've got to do one of these, and when I heard that we were going to be meeting with friEdTechnology and these two distinguished people, I had to jump on and get the chance to talk to them. So I'm really excited to introduce. We've got Dr. Racheal Burden, learning guide at friEdTechnology. Nice to meet you, Racheal. And we've got Amy Meyer, who's you're the CEO and founder of friEdTechnology.
That's right.
Awesome. Just quickly, kind of Racheal, your background prior to starting at friEd.
So, hello all. I am Racheal Burden. I currently work in a school district about 30 minutes south of Atlanta. I am an instructional technology specialist that supports every high school. So we have about 10 high schools and 3 programs. So about 13 different spots that I support. I have a complete background in middle school. So, 10 years of middle school craziness that, I just believe there's a special reward for middle school teachers out there, and I've got it. Other than that, I'm a mom. I am very passionate about tech, edtech, and equity in our classrooms, and that's me.
Awesome. Well, I'm really glad to get the chance to talk to you today. And Amy, what's your background?
Well, gosh, that's a hard question. Well, I started friEdTechnology. Before that, I worked in school districts. I was a teacher, a staff development director, an education technology director. I worked in technology department. So I've done a lot of different things, but for about the last 10 years, I've been doing friEdTechnology, and we're a PD partner company of Hāpara, of Google, of Microsoft. And so we do education technology professional development. And we do that all over the country, and that's really my life's work, and my passion is really education technology and working with teachers on best practices of integrating technology into their classrooms.
Wonderful. That's great. Our topic today is post-pandemic, what's next for EdTech? Obviously, we're going to solve everybody's problems here on this webinar and lay the future foundation for the entire industry. But we were joking before the call that both of your guys' backgrounds are way nicer than mine. So I'm going to try and make sure that we still steer the ship from our office here in Chicago. But for you guys, just let's kick it off. What's been the biggest changes you've seen since pandemic learning started? Amy, I'll start with you. Being able to, wearing all the different hats that you've had and jumping in and out of schools, what have been some of the biggest changes you've seen?
Well, obviously, doing teacher professional development virtually has been a huge change. And for teachers, doing their teaching job virtually has been a huge change. I mean, before the pandemic happened, my company did probably 95% of our revenue was from face-to-face professional development with teachers. So we were flying all over the country and, literally in the room with people. And then all of the sudden after spring break last year, we have not traveled since then. So that's been really huge for us. I want to talk about Jefferson Parish Public Schools for a second, because they're really the first large school district that leaned on us after the pandemic began to get assistance. And we worked hand in hand with them literally for months to figure out how do we get teachers where they need to be to teach virtually, because everybody has wanted to do technology PD face-to-face. It's like the last bastion of face-to-face professional development. If I knew how to do it, I wouldn't need you to come here. That's kind of what people would say. And so we worked a lot with them to figure out, how do we make this best case scenario? And I know Racheal is going to talk about this, and she's really an expert at it, but especially working with school districts like Jefferson Parish, where there are so many students from poverty, how do we make sure that students are getting an equitable education, and how do we know what's happening in the classroom? So those have all been questions that we've been struggling to answer. I think we've all found different software solutions like Hāpara, for example, that have helped us answer those questions. So a big change is the reliance on the softwares we use, and the softwares that we're using have changed drastically in the last year.
Absolutely.
I absolutely can piggyback off of that. I mean, you know, it was like this huge shock wave that went through our district. For example, that Friday, I will never forget, it was Friday, March 13th. We told teachers, hey, we're going to go home for 2 weeks. And I remember walking out of the building and teachers being like, do you think we're really going to come back? And I'm like, I don't know. And fast forward, you know, 6 months later, we went virtual. We had every intention of coming back to school, you know, face to face, and it didn't happen. So, you know, I think it was changes in waves. I think first it was just shock. I cannot tell you what my email inbox looked like on March 16th, which was the first day of virtual learning. It was crazy, you know. But then as we got through the school year, it kind of transitioned into this kind of, okay, I can do this. And how do I make it better for my students? So, like you said, really honing in on to the technology that we were using and making sure that we were using it effectively with our students. I got to experience this from two sides. So, well, actually three, but I'm also a parent, and I had a second grader, or a first grader. I'm sorry, she was in first grade, and she was having a great year. Her teacher, though, just wasn't really. She's a great teacher, and a lot of the great teachers thrive off of that hands-on learning. And her teacher was one of them. And I'll never forget. She told me, you know, I don't know if I can do this. I can barely send emails sometimes. And I'm like, you're gonna be fine. We'll figure it out. By the end of the school year, she was making YouTube videos with her team.
Wow.
They were collaborating. It was phenomenal. I mean, anytime she asked us, she had amazing questions, and I was there to support her. But it was just great to see everyone kind of embrace those things, you know. I think one of the other big changes was I think that we really kind of saw and began to understood how our schools are communities outside of our four walls.
Mhm.
And I think, you know, Amy, you mentioned not being able to travel, but those schools began to see how much we need each other and how much we have to work together to keep education going even outside of our school buildings.
Absolutely. I want to come back to community because I think that that's a really important piece, and it's been one of the focuses of some of our webinars because it's such an integral part, and it's so hard to keep going once you've gone virtual. You know, it's funny you said 2 weeks. I laugh because the office down the hall from us, there's a big sign posted, you know, will return March 31st, or once the stay-at-home order is lifted, and I don't think that they meant March 31st, 2021, but they're still not back yet. But I mean, can you imagine the uproar if we had at the time been like, we'll see everybody in, you know, about a year and a half. It's crazy. I think it'll probably be the most change in education that we see in our lifetime, the biggest transformation and sweep. Question for you. I've got a lot of friends that are teachers, and you know, I hear a lot of them say, I can't wait to be back in the classroom when everything's back to the way it used to be.
Yeah.
You know, I think some things will go back to the way they used to be. I think some things will probably change. But from your guys' perspective, what's here to stay in terms of the new model of education?
Well, I had a great phone call yesterday with a friend of mine in Mississippi, and she's a CNI director in a large school district in Mississippi. And I asked her that question, and I wasn't even anticipating you asking me that today, but I asked her just because I was curious about her opinion about it. And she said, Amy, I don't think things are ever going to go back to how they were before. And I asked her several follow-up questions about what she meant about that. So her school district is a high poverty school district. She said lots of our secondary students now have full-time jobs. They do school at night. Neither they nor their parents want to go back to how things were before. She said, I don't think we'll ever have all of our students back face to face. And that was really the most shocking thing that I've heard from a person inside a school district who's really doing this work every day, all day long, and is really on the ground with it. And that change would be huge. I have talked to a lot of school districts now that are starting a virtual school, and they're making plans for students to have an alternative that they've never had before. I mean, we've been so tied to the butt in a chair model is what we always call of it and how we think of it, that we haven't thought a lot about how do we know if students are learning? Because before, if your butt was in the chair, you got credit for showing up. You might not have done anything. Your mind might have been elsewhere. You might have been, writing a letter to your boyfriend during class, but your butt was in the chair. And so, we gave you a check mark for attendance and, like you got credit for that. Well, that's a question that we at friEdTechnology have really been struggling with helping teachers answer is now, and obviously we should have always been asking this question, but because of how things were structured, we didn't. And now we really have to ask ourselves, how do I know my students are learning? What have they learned? And how am I going to differentiate to close whatever gaps are left in their learning? We've had this one size fits all kind of model for so long that this is forcing everybody to rethink it. And by the way, I don't know exactly what the t-shirt's going to say yet. So if anybody listening has ideas, please let us know, because it'll be in Amazon. You can search for friEdTechnology, but it's something like, we told you so, everyone in edtech. Because we've talked to so many people, and I know Racheal has, who have said, I know you tried to teach me this last year and I didn't listen. And I'm sorry now, you were right. I should have come to all of those PD sessions that you were doing. So the other change is, we're hearing from schools more and more often, before the pandemic, Amy, I've got 30 teachers in my district of 7,000 teachers who want to learn this thing that your company teaches. Can we do a day with these 30 people who are really interested and want this? And now they're saying, I need you to work with all 7,000 of my teachers because they're now required to know this and do this on a daily basis. And there is no more of this. We worked with a lot of Saturday teachers before. That's what we called them, people who wanted to show up, who came of their own volition on their own time. And that's a massive change for us from a PD perspective. But I'm curious, Racheal, I mean, how are things changing in your district? Because I'm very curious about that.
I will absolutely say the same thing. So my job at the beginning of the school year is to visit every single campus that I support. So you're talking, 13 trips. It's a pretty, we serve about, I think, 43,000 students. And we are one of those districts that were one-to-one. We were one-to-one with devices for the past, I think this makes year 3. So
So you
September.
were very well prepared compared to most districts.
We were, right? Well, so 2021 will make year 4. So we got devices in September of 2017. And I was actually still in the classroom at the time. My son, who was a 3rd grader then, got a device. And honestly, that was the first time I had ever really seen a Chromebook. So we got Chromebooks for every single student in our district, and K through 2 got iPads, class sets of iPads. They couldn't take them home at the time. But we kind of just said, here's a device. And so teachers and students have had access to these devices. And actually, not this past summer, but the summer before was the first summer we let students take devices home over the summer break. So we kind of just, hey, this is your device, you're going to keep it. But with those devices, there was no kind of pre-work done before, right? So we gave devices, but there wasn't a foundation. Teachers didn't have a good foundation for using these devices. So like Amy said, we were doing PD, but by that point, it was kind of like the devices had become cumbersome to teachers. They were a distraction to teachers. So they were pulling back from the devices and really kind of harping on, we need textbooks. So we adopted actually both physical and digital textbooks in our district. Last year was our first year with the software. And like you said, we were doing the PD, but it was just kind of like, okay, thank you. Next, the whole Ariana Grande, thank you, next, But it was funny because last July, we did professional development as a district. It was all online, and we could not get people. Like, we had to live stream our sessions because we were hitting capacity. You know, teachers want to know the information now. And I don't think, I think that's one of those things, like you said, Amy, that's not going to change. Teachers, the majority of our teachers now understand that technology can actually enhance your classroom, you know, and they kind of had to shift their mindset very quickly, and they're embracing it now. Also, one of the things that I do think that changed for the good over during the pandemic is that I believe that for a long time, schools and school districts have, we always wanted parents in our buildings, right? But we created these strict rules for how you could interact with schools, right? You had to come to open house, you had to come to, you know, parent teacher conferences, you had to come to Donuts with Dad. You couldn't do any of that virtually, right? You had to actually physically appear for those things to count, and that's gone, right? Every single school I talk to now is leaning heavily on technology to facilitate those meetings. So they said we've seen more parents email us, more parents than ever have showed up to our Title I meetings, more parents than ever have shown up to even IEP meetings, which, as a former special education teacher, I know that those were difficult to get parents into. But if we really start to think about it, I think that we've really kind of taken off the limits in education as far as our schools are concerned. You know, if we think about, you know, in these districts often, or schools where parents couldn't make it into the classroom, it was never because they didn't want to. It was just because they couldn't. So if we think about this, imagine you need to make a doctor's appointment, right? If I'm at work, that means that I have to take off work because I have to account for travel time too. I have to go to the doctor's appointment, and then I have to get back, to work. We've cut that out. Parents can schedule a teacher conference and take it on their lunch break. And so, again, we've taken off the limits in education through technology, and I am so encouraged. I hate it had to happen this way, but
Yeah.
honestly, and Amy, you probably can concur, there's really no other way that this was going to happen.
I don't know if it would have.
Yeah, I don't think that it was. I think all of the tools that we're using now, like you said, the tools that we're using now are changing, but they were always there. We
Yeah.
just didn't have that buy-in that we have now.
Yep.
Rachel, follow-on question for you then, because you talk about community and you talk about, you know, increased parental engagement and those pieces, and at Hāpara we're very focused on students as well, and you know, and student digital citizenship and those different pieces. And I know we were doing a series of webinars over the summer with kids and asking them, like, what do you like and what do you dislike and what have you learned? And unanimously across, I think, the 12 different students I spoke to, the number one thing that they missed was the interaction with their teacher. Because when they were having a bad day, there wasn't somebody there that could look at them and be like, Robert, what's going on? Because I know something's up. And it's a critical role that teachers play with their students is beyond just teaching, is that relationship and that lifelong bond that's formed. So I guess my question for you is like, what have you seen schools doing to make sure that we get back to that point? Is there a way of doing it? Because I know that, like, you know, we can have a great conversation here, but it's not going to trump the relationship we would form if we were sitting across the table from each other having this conversation either. So
I think that we've been really creative. We have seen, you know, even from a parental and student side, you know, I've seen principals have lunch with the principal, you know, lunch with the counselor, lunch with the teacher, you know, just really being creative about, you know, creating those connections and keeping those connections alive. It's difficult, and nothing, like you say, is going to trump that. But I do think that we are able to make connections with our students. It just has to be meaningful. And this, again, is with any professional development, right? People come to things that matter. We have buy-in for things that matter to people, you know? And I think that the shift for these things has to be that they're more student driven, which isn't a bad thing, right? Instead of us creating these things for the students, have them create the opportunities. So, what is it that you would like to do with me online? You can play games, we can do all of these things, but honestly, the buy-in has to be from the students because that's who we're looking to, communicate and build with. A lot of it just really has to do with, I think, intentions. So when we go into these situations with true love and intentionality behind it, our intentions are pure. We want our students, and we can say, teachers, a lot of us, we can say, I really want this. But when you go into it and you're passionate about it, your students have created these opportunities, they're even going to make that shift and continue to make that connection on and offline. Just this past weekend, I hosted a Girl Scouts meeting, and unfortunately, it was all virtual, and we have girls that range from kindergarten to 5th grade. And while it was difficult, I think the less we talked and the more that the kids talked, we saw them come alive. They miss that personal interaction with peers. They miss it with adults too. But I think that just handing the platform over to them and letting them drive is what's key.
That's a great example. Amy, do you have talk to us about kind of, some call it the flipped classroom. There's all sorts of different, terminology for it, but talk to me a little bit about what you've seen, within schools when it comes to how technology has given maybe more control to the student in their learning.
Yeah, definitely. So we've seen a real increase in people asking specifically for social emotional learning sessions and learning experiences. And we were actually asked by one of the companies that we work with to create a learning experience for them to use at conferences and things like that with teachers. And one of the best things that came out of that is such a simple idea that anybody can use any day. And I love the way that it gives students a voice in such a subtle yet could be profound way. It's something I know if I were teaching now, I would use this every day. So you create a Google form, and in the Google form, you just have some really simple questions your kids answer. Maybe you even don't even make them put their name or anything. You could just do automatically capture the email address because you can recognize who the student is from that. And then the question is just, how are you feeling today? And you have a range of emotions there, because I would like to know if I'm walking into the classroom with my students and I'm expecting them to learn. I think everybody has realized now that the emotions that you have at home don't just stop because you enter a classroom. They're still there. If my parents are getting divorced right now and I'm in 8th grade, I'm probably not going to be coming to school ready to learn. And if my teachers don't know that's what's going on, or that I'm experiencing these issues from home, they may not understand why I respond the way I do, or I can't pay attention, or my grades are falling, or whatever. So what we did is we just created this Google form. Students come into the classroom, they answer the question about their emotions. It could be check boxes, it could be numbers, however you want to organize it. And then just in your form spreadsheet, apply a color coding system that will happen automatically for you, that shows you more positive emotions maybe in green and more negative emotions in red, so that when you look at that classroom, I pull this up, my kids have just entered the room, I'm like, wow, I got a lot of kids with a lot of stuff going on right now today. Let me be sensitive to that. And it really, I think, would have helped me as a teacher to come in there and think, I don't know what my kids are going through right now. And I think that having students in the home environment while they're learning made us extra sensitive to realizing that, hey, wait a minute, this kid is from a home environment. I don't just pluck them out of that and drop them into school and all those problems go away just because they're not in that environment or they are in that environment. So I think it's been a good thing for educators to help us sort of make that connection that, yes, it seems so obvious, but at the same time, 90+% of school is just the way we've always done it. and that's just a fact. I mean, we're all living off the history that we lived as students, and we're recreating that for our students. And you can't reimagine every single thing about school all at one time unless there's a global pandemic, which there was, and so we did. So I think that's a big change that's happened, is the whole push for SEL and the realization amongst all educators at all different kinds of levels that SEL is important and that it is impacting student learning, whether we acknowledge it or not.
Absolutely. We had one of the people that is watching the webinar just wrote in and said, emoticons on Jamboard or Padlet could be used as well. And I think that's a great suggestion.
Yes, it is. I love that idea.
And to all the people watching, if you've got questions for our panel, please feel free to shoot them in, and I'll make sure that we get them asked. Amy, earlier you were talking about how a superintendent in Mississippi, or a curriculum instruction, said that they think that it's changed forever, right? And before schools, it was, school is from 8 to 3, fit your life around it. And now it's a little bit of, oh, you have a life, let's fit school into your life. But the big question is going to come up is, are my kids learning anything? And so, standardized testing goes through its waves, right? Sometimes people think it's the answer to all of our problems. It's the bane of most teachers' existence most of the time. How are we going to, how do we know if students are learning? And so, what's going to change post-pandemic in terms of looking at student learning gains?
Well, we have to rethink what assessment means in schools. And unfortunately, that's one of those things that's we call it the dreaded twatty. That's the way I've always done it. And it's a twatty thing, assessment is. And we really have used it. We've used it in a way that's not very authentic. And I'll tell you an example that I think proves this. I was a high school English teacher most of my career that I was in the classroom, and my students' major grades a lot of times came from a piece of writing. And that piece of writing was something that I didn't use a red pen because I knew better. You can't use a red pen, looks like blood all over the paper, but I used a green one or a blue one, and I would write things all over the students' papers. I did this for probably a couple of years, and I spent, thousands of hours in my life doing this. And I gave them back to students, those papers, and they looked at them for about 5 seconds, and they stuffed it in their backpack. And that was the last anybody ever saw of it. And that represented from 10 to 30 minutes of my time that I had put into putting all of that information onto that thing that was a summative assessment. And that's crazy when you start to think about it, because if an assessment is summative, first of all, that means the learning is over, you learned it or you did not. There's no future in that. So why am I ever correcting anything that's truly summative? I should never be doing that. So we have to really think about, there probably shouldn't be any summative assessments. Every assessment should be formative, because if he didn't learn this, if Robert's my student and Robert didn't learn this in this given time, I don't just get to go, well, I guess Robert's never going to learn to write an informational essay in his junior year in high school. We're moving on. Sorry, Robert. That's just not acceptable anymore. We all realize that now. So no more really summative assessments. If I have to put something in the grade book that's a test or whatever, okay, I put the grade in. But especially as a writing teacher, I would reimagine what that looks like. Robert, this may be your 4th draft, but look at this. Looks like it's not your final draft after all, because this is a 70 and I'm expecting a 90% to move on from this assignment. So we're going to keep working on it until, the cows come home or the school year's over or whatever. So looking at assessment as a way to gauge where my student is in the learning process, as opposed to something that is a finalized act, is the most necessary thing that can happen. And standardized tests have never been, nor ever will be, the answer to this question, because the teachers don't have that information in any kind of a way that could help with learning. When I look at your assessments from last year and your last year of English class, I have no idea what the situations were in your learning environment. Maybe you just couldn't stand your teacher and that's why you failed that assessment. I don't know that. So I can't take that and say, well, these are the things Robert doesn't know how to do. I better get started right here because that's what his standardized test says. Because there's so many other factors that come into play there. So anyway, okay, that's my soapbox. I will step down off of it now. And
It's a great soapbox. Racheal, you're an educator and you're a parent and you're a former student. We all are. And so I think that part of it is too is, and I'm not a parent yet, I will be at some point, but you look at it and you're like, well, when I was in school, this is, I went to school in Canada and we had full slate of exams, midterms and finals, grades 7 to 12. Like, it's so easy now, or whatever it is. Do you think that maybe one of the benefits of the pandemic is we've kind of broken the cycle of what parents expect education to look like?
I do. I think it's amazing. I think, again, though, I think that education has this kind of idea around parents that parental involvement is kind of like high levels of parental involvement are kind of, the top of the line. That's what we really want. We want parents to be involved. But we've only set parental involvement to look like certain things, Even I, as a parent, have had to miss certain things, and I'm in education. It doesn't make me any better or worse, of a parent. But again, like I said before, us breaking down the walls of our schools is really important. I think, like Amy said, I think that just this idea around assessments as a parent, I believe, so in Georgia, for example, this year, we can opt out. Now, this is the funny thing, though. Parents have always been able to opt out, always. It just was kind of publicized this year. Oh, if you're remote, you don't have to come in. And it's like, oh, okay. No paperwork, no nothing. We didn't have to sign anything. Now, parents, again, have always been able to do this. But because we've made this information available to parents, they're exercising that right for whatever reason. Some parents, their children are remote, and maybe they just can't get their children to the school to take the assessment. Other parents are like, I don't need the stress. I don't want my child to have the stress. I don't want any of that. So I think it's a mix of us not doing what we did before in schools, but also parents not adhering to what they did before too. Parents are open to asking more questions. I think we're open to asking more why questions instead of the how. So there's less compliance because of compliance and more compliance because it's the right thing to do for my student at this time. I can imagine, I've been in the classroom and had students who just couldn't function that day. Like, I just cannot. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. Maybe it was test taking day. Maybe it was anxiety. Maybe it was they just didn't eat breakfast. Maybe we've all had those mornings. Yesterday was one of those mornings for me where it just seems like everything is falling apart. And you just need some time to kind of pull yourself together. And so the grace that we're giving in these processes, I think, are being given to parents, they're being given to students and schools. And I think that that's going to continue to go. And that is one of those things that just as a parent, I think is exciting. And I'm just excited to see where this continues. Assessments have always been one of those things, like you said, that has been kind of a pain in the butt for everyone for any and all reasons. And it's looking like, honestly, that's really going to change. I think sooner than a lot of people can imagine. I can see the shift to portfolios, like you said, those forever formative assessments. And I think that edtech is really going to be the driving force behind all of it.
agreed.
Hāpara, we were started in New Zealand, so we're very much shaped around David Hattie's meta-analysis work that he did. And I get the opportunity, well, pre-pandemic, I used to get the opportunity to go to New Zealand a few times a year and see what they're doing in schools. And
Cool.
each country's different, right? But New Zealand in a lot of places is considered one of the leaders when it comes to education. And what blew my mind there was even, and this is all pre-pandemic, you'd walk into one of the schools there, and it's grades, it's a K-5 open classroom, and there's different
Wow.
areas, kids are working on different things, but everything is portfolio based, everything is personalized. It's an entirely different way of looking at education. And it's interesting because it's, you know, in the US, we relied heavily on assessment and, you know, on drill and practice on all of
The
these
factory
pieces.
model.
Factory model.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
do you think pandemic will kind of springboard some of that other research into maybe how we approach education? Do you think it'll be a mix? You know, because every country has their way of doing things.
I may not be as hopeful as Racheal here.
Well, the research is already out there. You know, I mean, there's plenty of people that have already done research about, you know, the United States. We want to get where New Zealand is in education, but we're not willing to give up the, you know, predated idea of what school looks and feels like for students. So I think that we're really going to have some of those reckoning moments of like, well, if that's what we really want, then here's what we're really going to have to do. You know,
Yeah.
we aspire to be at the top of every chart, but we're not doing what they're doing. We're not feeding our students, you know, great breakfast and lunch. We're fighting about if kids should have, you know, whole wheat bread, you know, or they should be able to continue to buy junk food at school, you know, instead of really providing those opportunities for students to flourish and the ways that research says these kids need. You know, our parents want to be involved, but are we giving them the true opportunities to be involved? You know, we have to think about. So, my research was heavily into homeless families. So, again, I have this just kind of heart for people who are everywhere in every spectrum of our life to be involved with our students and create these kind of just opportunities to flourish, and just giving parents greater access to information about their student, about resources, about what's going on around them, I think can really help too. I don't know. You're right. Maybe I'm a positive Patty, Amy. I'm sorry.
You are. I love it. I need people like you. I guess I have a lot of fears around the things that you're hopeful about, and I really truly do hope that you're right. I fear that we may see a pendulum swift shift back in the other direction, and that people may kind of double down on what they were doing before, and I know what human nature is, and I'm afraid that human nature will prevail for a while longer. The way that, and I'll talk about Texas for a second, because we work in a lot of different states, but we do the most work in Texas because that's where we're based and that's where we started as a company. In Texas, we as an educational system, and I'll say myself as part of that, tend to over rely on standardized tests and on systems that a lot of times are not very effective for people, but because that's the way we've always done it and it's a system that's in place, we all understand it, we all know what to do. And a lot of educators, most of us are very compliant people. It's why people will loan us money. People will loan educators money when they won't loan anyone else money, because we're the kind of people who we pay back our bills. We do what we say we're going to do. We read and sign the contract, and then we fulfill it. We may not always be the kind of people who are like, let's go way outside the box and see how this could work in an ideal environment. And we also have a big problem with thinking that kids can't do things that kids can do. New Zealand's system requires a belief that children naturally want to learn and grow as people. And our system is set up to believe that we must make you do this or else you will never want to accomplish this. It's more of a stick than it is a carrot. And I've taught long enough, and in places where I know I've taught enough children from different diverse backgrounds to know that it is true. Children do naturally want to learn, but they may not naturally want to learn about the exact topic that you want them to learn about at the time that you want them to learn about it. So I am a huge believer in giving students as much choice about as many different things as you possibly can. And if any teachers out there, school people, ever come back and watch this later, that in my educated opinion is a shift that we can all make. Is anytime you're making a decision for a child, ask yourself, is this something that I could actually let the student decide? You don't have to let kids make big decisions. Nobody's going to abandon their curriculum tomorrow. They're just not going to. That's going to take years and years to rethink that. But do I have to decide this small little thing for this kid? If we're doing student presentations tomorrow, Hattie's Influences tells us that jigsaw method is one of the most powerful things a teacher could implement tomorrow, is jigsaw method. If I'm going to do that, do I have to pick the groups? Do I have to tell the groups when they're going to present? Do I have to decide Robert's group is going first and Rachel's is going second? No, I don't have to decide any of those things. My job is to direct the learning and to create an environment that is that you want to learn inside of. And when we reimagine our jobs as educators as creating an environment that helps students fulfill their natural desire to learn, that's when we start moving toward the model that New Zealand's got. But y'all, we are light years away from that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think there's teachers out there that are doing that, and I think that those are going to be the people who hopefully drive these conversations, and that we don't continue to lean on the people who are doing it the same. For a long time, education goes in waves. So rubrics came in a few years ago. And when rubrics came in, it was more of, set expectations. And then rubrics became these rigid ideas. You have to do this, you have to do that. And it's like, hold on. Let's go back to what our purpose was, which was to provide guidance. So I was always the teacher that said, they'd be like, Ms. Burden, can I do this? And I'd be like, sure. I don't care. Here's what I'm looking for. This is what I'm looking for. However you do that is up to you. So like you said, Amy, taking the reins off, I think, is where a lot of our teachers struggle. But I don't even know if it's really the teachers as much as it is the people who, again, are driving these conversations and creating, these ideas and teaching our teachers. So instead of, it's more of that kind of Montessori idea in New Zealand. I just think kind of the encouragement behind it really goes back to that SEL, the whole being of the child, and providing opportunities for them to show themselves through, and we become the facilitators for learning. I'm encouraged. I hope that's the way we shift. Like Amy said, I'm a positive Patty here. And it's going to take a long time, but I think that we're going to see it come through and shine as the example for success soon.
I need to go to New Zealand and take a look for myself, frankly.
Me too.
Absolutely. We'll get to Air New Zealand and we'll just get a big plane and fly us all over there once things have calmed down.
I'm packed already.
They handled the virus a lot better there because it's an island with a couple million people. So it's national news if one person catches it there. So it's it's a little bit different, but and nothing to not to say that the U.S. system is that there aren't benefits to the education system that we have here as well. Just kind of looking forward, not to look at it kind of in a negative light, but a lot of our educational leaders that we work with at Hāpara are concerned about what their budgets are going to be doing in the next few years, because nationally we hear a lot about, the $200 billion that's going into funding through ESSER and those different pieces. What a lot of people don't realize, unless you're in education, is only about 10% comes from the federal government. The rest is state and local funds that are going into education funding, and those are the pieces that are going to take a hit most likely because of COVID. So what are you seeing in terms of schools kind of doing more? It's that more with less, and that's why some of our best teachers get exhausted and leave. We interview them at Hāpara, and it's like, no, just you're going to be a great candidate, and I want to hire you, but please stay in school because I want to send my kid to you. But Amy, what are you seeing in terms of more with less and strategies there and preparing for uncertainty in the next few years?
Yeah, I think everybody's trying to proof themselves against the next unseen disaster, because people got caught with this pandemic. This was not something that was in anybody's emergency response plan. There was no pandemic section there. And now when we listen to scientists, we know that this is probably not a one-off event. This is likely to happen again. Even this virus can mutate and come back and be, make our vaccines ineffective. So they want to make sure that they have a plan in place now that they know that this could happen. That's really important to schools. But you're right. I think everybody's been holding their breath, like, let me not spend any money. I don't know if y'all have heard the phone ringing during this. I've been trying to mute my microphone as fast as I can. But this week, schools started scheduling professional development. Schools usually schedule professional development in early March. So that tells you something about, how people are responding to this. Everybody is just like, oh, I better wait and see what's going to happen now, So now I think people are just kind of starting to breathe. They're kind of thinking things are going to go back to normal. Luckily, a lot of places, and I'll talk about Mississippi now because they have, that I know of, there's no other adoption like this going on in this country, in the United States. Mississippi's legislature actually took their CARES Act funding, ESSER money, and they used it in, I think, a really, really smart way. They actually mandated that in the state of Mississippi, every single child K-12 must have a device issued to them. So this is not, we're going to buy class sets of iPads and they're going to be in a classroom or Chromebooks or whatever device. This is, that device goes with that kid and you got to have one for every single person. And my company, friEdTechnology, has been heavily involved in that implementation because we're the PD providers for this state implementation. And so I think that's a wonderful thing that's come out of this, and that has started to help schools get in a position where they can deal with crises like this and they can continue learning. If it's a snow day and people still have electricity, they can learn. Our next big hurdle, though, is access, because in rural places, Texas, Mississippi, all over the South, I would assume other parts of the country too, but I'm not as knowledgeable about those parts. There are many, many people who still live outside of where internet access is working at a feasible level. So, if you have a 1995 dial-up connection, you're not logging into your Google Classroom and seamlessly interacting with resources there because your internet's not allowing you to do that. So this is the next divide that we have to cross to really pandemic-proof our country and make sure that we can keep learning and working when we can't be physically together in a room. And now I can't remember what you asked anymore, but that was a lot of talking.
It was a great answer. It's interesting, Amy, because I sell into edtech, which is a 4-letter word with a lot of educators. But
yes.
It's the interesting thing is we used to talk to IT directors, curriculum and instruction, and we'd say, oh, okay, so what's your instructional technology plan? They'd say, well, we're buying Chromebooks for 3 grades this year. And it's like, oh, that's great, but like, what's the instructional?
That's not a plan.
It's a big paperweight if you don't actually have a plan to do anything with it. And the answers were always like, well, we spent $3 million on devices. There's no money left to spend on anything else. Like, teachers better figure it out. And so have you seen more, like with Hāpara, it's an entire instructional layer, it's helping the teachers. There's a lot of different components to it that, where we say, a device does not equal instruction. You have to have a teacher, but then you have to empower the teacher through tools. So what kind of tools are you seeing districts kind of connecting more to these tools, and which ones are you seeing?
They're starting to. I think that it's in early stages, because if you haven't had devices before, I think there's a cycle of ed tech adoption. And I'm not sure you can bypass any parts of that cycle. So for example, part of that cycle is teachers adopting tools for their use in their work as a teacher. I could be argued out of it, but I think that as a teacher, I've got to go through that part of the cycle before I can get to the part of the cycle where I really am able to think of it as technology integration, where I can design a lesson that students are meaningfully using technology as a part of in order to learn, and not learning to use technology. So instructional technology is using technology to learn, not learning to use technology. And I think that's an arc. I have to learn to use it as a teacher. I have to help students learn to use it. That's a part, like, we want teachers to skip that because we think kids already know how to do it, but kids don't know how to use technology in order to learn. They know how to use their phone to consume technology. That's a very different thing from being a creator. And then we've got to get over to that part of the arc where teachers are empowering students. And we're kind of stuck. We get stuck at those different places, and tools like Hāpara and tools that like you use the terminology, empower teachers, I think they help us move through that cycle faster. Because if I'm over here just learning how to use technology for my own purposes, I do not have the confidence to say to my students, all right, I want you all to work on this great project online. And I have this trust in my heart that you're going to do the right thing, because I don't trust my own instructional design. I don't know if what I did was even the right thing. So how am I going to turn you loose and feel like nobody's going to come into my room and say, Miss Mayer, you should see what Robert was looking at on the internet? I'm scared of that as a teacher. So tools like Hāpara give me the power that I need to move into that process without so much fear. Otherwise, it can literally take me years to get there, as because I'm getting there in my own mind, and that's a tough journey. And nobody in business, by the way, has ever been asked to make a change like this without extensive job retraining. They don't call it professional development most of the time in the outside the education sector. We talk about it like this is a thing you might get if you're fortunate and work for a school district that values it and all that. Nobody goes into an executive's office in a company and says, we're going to ask you to change everything about the tools and software you use to do your job every day, all day long, and we're expecting you to figure it out. If you can't figure it out, here's the thing outside of work hours on a Saturday or at night, and we'll kindly offer this to you for you to do on your own time. I mean, people would be appalled. And yet that has been the model always in education. And because teachers are the kind of people who deeply care about what they do, and because they know how important what they do is, they have donated their time, their resources, their money to their profession and made this happen. But I wish schools would think of it like, well, sorry, we can't buy 5,000 devices because we only have the money to buy 4,000 devices in PD. That's all. So state, you got to give us more money because we can't make this happen. And that's why Mississippi's implementation is so special, because they did that. They said, yeah, if we're going to buy this many devices, we have to buy this much PD, and we have to make it happen for people during their workday. And it's a very special implementation. If you don't know a lot about it, I'd love to tell anybody here who's interested more about what they're doing.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look into it more. So we'll have a call afterwards at some point, I'm sure. Racheal, you see it from all of the different perspectives as well. My significant other's an emergency room nurse, right? And nurses and teachers, to me, there's a lot of similarities there. And we have this weird thing where I think that like we underpay them because we think that they're so passionate and they have such purpose that it means that they don't have to, get what you would get in a private sector job or something like that.
Martyrs or saints.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I mean, Racheal, for the educators out there and that sort of thing, they're tired right now, right? Like exhausted. Everyone's exhausted, but you, I'm sure, as a parent and an educator, trying to wrangle your kids and teach and do all of these things, I can't even imagine it. So, I mean, you've got positivity still. How do you have that positivity still?
Well, this has been maybe a long time. Like maybe at the beginning of this, I wasn't as positive. Well, I wasn't. I will say, through all of this, it's been really hard because a lot of times I think we flourish off knowing, oh, at least I only have to do it for this long, right? So as a teacher, we go to work, we're like, oh my gosh, I can't wait till, December for my 2 weeks off. And then you're like, oh, if I could just make it to spring break, And so as a parent, I've had to kind of reimagine even how I parent. As an employee, I remember at the beginning of this, it was like I was tethered to my computer. I couldn't put it down. And so I've also had to reimagine that as well. I have friends that are in the medical field. My really close friend is a nurse. Her husband is a nurse. She went to California 3 times as a COVID, response unit, pediatrician nurses. It just seems like all of us are kind of in this together. So I really think that it's taken us to lean on each other and be creative, create our own pods. In research, we call this social capital. So you call, the information that we're able to share amongst ourselves and really kind of share that with others. And I really believe that that's where we kind of have to shift next. I want to open up my social capital bubble a little bit and make sure that I'm able to share down and up. I think again, it's just there's no trick to this. It's been difficult, and I think the first step in acknowledging that is what's most important. Amy had to change how she did her job. Robert, I'm sure you had to change how you did your job, and it was not a long process. We changed overnight, and just really realizing that we're all in this. I have parents, friends who are like, well, I'm just nervous about, my kid. He's going to be behind. And I'm like, listen, we're all in this together. The good thing about this is that, everybody is going through this at the same time. Some districts, some schools may have hit a little bit harder, but I think that it's encouraging to know that, this wasn't just a one-off. Nope, New York didn't just get hit. Their kids were not the only ones that were at home and without a teacher. It was every single state in the United States was at home at some point during this pandemic. So really kind of wrapping our heads around this and realizing that we're not in this alone.
Oh, and globally, I mean, there's no country, and that's the amazing, that in our interconnected world now, there was no country that was unfazed. And we sometimes, I think, I often forget living in Chicago that, it's hitting new spikes in other countries that are exceeding the infection rate of the US as we're lucky enough to get access to the vaccine. So,
Right.
Where we see light at the end of the tunnel, there's a lot of educators that we work with Hāpara that are still in the midst of the fight. So
Ontario's in a full lockdown right now, and this I think is their third lockdown, and they're on complete lockdown. I mean, complete.
No stores are open. Public parks are closed.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, provincial borders between British Columbia and Alberta are shut down. They're stopping people at the highway and not allowing them through. It's
intense. And I see, and like you said, I think social media is doing a good job of really kind of highlighting how we are in this together. This is not just a you or a me. I do think that, again, social media has kind of created new communities that we've been able to share how certain communities have been hit more hard. I remember at the beginning of this, it was something like Black communities or Black people were more likely to be infected by the virus at like a rate of 3.5, I believe. So we're not able to hide those things. But I also believe in not hiding is opening up our eyes to things like Mississippi, high poverty, very rural areas that often are big pockets of minorities that are hit most hard. So those efforts of the governor, I'm assuming there in Mississippi, to address those is kind of one of those things that we need to really begin that rollout of equity. So that is equity at the top, being able to be pushed down in efforts through professional development through companies like friEdTech. So again, reimagining how this tragedy, because it's a tragedy, has hit us all. And the after effects of this, I think it's going to be amazing to see what comes out of this in the best ways. My district actually took some CARES money and we created, because some of that is earmarked for, SEL for long term. And we created positions in every single school for basically social emotional learning kind of head in that school. Every single school, every single one.
That's
and
amazing.
they're there. Yes. I honestly, I can sing the praises of my districts. They have looked out for us. They have acknowledged our work. They have been transparent. We are working really hard, and they're doing a great job about it. I mean, it's. I wish I could remember the name of the position, but essentially their role is to kind of be intermediate, but social emotionally based learning.
Tell us the name of your district, Racheal.
So I'm in Henry County Schools. We're in McDonough, Georgia. Again, a district, I believe we have 30. No, don't get me the line. I'm not sure how many schools we have. It's up there. We have about 43,000 students, and I'm just excited because, again, equity is one of those things, and we've actually just adopted policy in our district around equity, which opportunity, access, and outcomes are our 3 bases. So we're not just doing this one-hit wonder. We're actually coming back to follow through and ensure that our students have these equitable experiences. And it's not just technology, it's not just in the classroom, it's also through things like fine arts. So we're increasing access to things like orchestra and dance and different things like that we really kind of leave off. And again, that whole child, I'm just really excited to see how this all plays out, because I think that that's becoming a new point of work in our districts, and it comes through providing edtech like Hāpara. So we open up those walls and provide access to students and teachers, and it also has to be teacher-based through companies like friEdTech, because teachers have to know how to use the tech and how to do it effectively. And then as a parent, it also means that I need transparency from all of those things to kind of teach me too. Let me know what I need to do. So, yeah.
Next time I get depressed, I'm calling Racheal.
Come on, Amy. Listen.
I've already put her on speed dial, so
You know.
Please tell me how things are going to work out okay.
Yeah.
Just have like a little group social capital session once a week.
Right.
I think we'll all feel better. So no,
I think so too.
I think I only got halfway through the questions, or maybe I asked 2 of them that I intended to ask you guys. It was so wonderful speaking with both of you, and I could do it for another hour, but I want to be respectful of people's time as well. So I really appreciate both of you taking the time to talk with us today, and to our wider Hāpara community, and hopefully people outside of the Hāpara community as well. It's been a difficult time, and the thing that more than anything I've noticed is that in education, we're not hearing the horror stories, we're hearing the success stories. We're hearing about how people have done remarkable things with nothing. We've got teachers in Oakland who are driving art supplies around to their students because they just didn't have access to it. It's the incredible things that our teachers do and that our educators do. We can't thank them enough. So on behalf of our community, thank you for just being educators. Thank you for helping our educators. There are some stories within what has happened that will make great news for years to come, and I hope that they get surfaced, because it's every single person has their war story that they can tell after all of this. So
for real.
Things are going to change a little bit afterwards. Some things are going to come back to the middle. Change always means that pendulum swing, as you said, Amy, and hopefully in time it'll reach that place that it should be. But for all the people watching, all the leaders and all the educators that have changed and have done amazing things, stick with it. Don't get discouraged. It's if you need a pep talk, call Racheal. And just keep doing the incredible things that you're doing, and we'll all be better for it in the end. So again, thank you very
so much, Robert. So nice to meet you.
It's great to meet you guys as well. And one of these days I'll see you at a conference probably.
Yes,
because at some point
face to face.
Each other face to face again.
That's right. Gonna happen.
Excellent. Thank you. All the best. Thank you to everyone who tuned in.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.